Thank you very much. Welcome. The first thing that we normally do at our meetings is introductions. So I'm going to start right away with introductions. Mike, somehow or another, I always look to my left. So would you start us with introductions?
This is why Scott was saying we should switch up.
That's where I was gonna start.
Good afternoon, Mike Murphy, City of Charlottesville.
Hello, Scott Sosworth, UVA, Personal Transportation.
Welcome.
My name is John Urban. Hal Morgan, Charlotte Rural.
Carl Williams, Charles Ferry Transit.
Christine Jacobs, Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commissioner.
Mike Privet, Albemarle Board.
Brian Pinkston, Charlottesville City Council.
Diane Finakil, Albemarle Board of Supervisors.
Natalie Oshrin, Charlottesville City Council.
William Shiflett, Albemarle County Public Schools Transportation.
Peter Thompson.
And just let me make a comment that Charmaine is retired, or is retiring. So William is here in that position for Albemarle County Public Schools Transportation. So yeah, you have your own name.
Oh, official.
There you go.
Peter Thompson, Charlottesville Area Alliance.
Peter Krebs from the Piedmont Environmental Council.
Ann Wall, Albemarle County.
Sandy Shackelford, TJPDC.
Lucinda Shannon, TJPDC.
And Gretchen.
I'm Gretchen Thomas. I work with TJPDC.
And Sarah's in
And Sarah is, oh, there she goes.
Sarah Frankfurt,
And Katie.
And Katie is up on the screen, right?
Katie Miller with DRPT.
Great. So let me just make a comment and then we'll need to approve Katie joining the meeting. But I want to let everybody know, sadly, that this is Sandy's last meeting. So Sandy is moving to VDOT. So many of us will still continue to see Sandy, but in a very different role. Do you want to just take a minute and just tell folks, or not to put you on the spot?
Oh, well, no, it's been a privilege to serve with everybody here. There are some exciting initiatives. I'm going to go work with the VDOT Culpeper Planning District. I'm still going to be the VDOT support personnel for the TJPDC and the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO, so I'm still going to work a lot with you. Please don't hesitate to contact me. You know, I'm still, one of my jobs is still going to be to provide support to this region. So there's a lot of exciting things going on in the region. I'm sad that I'm not going to be able to be as big a part of some of those, but I'm also really excited to be able to continue to support all of the good work that you all are doing.
And VDOT has a lot of projects that are coming out right now in this region as well.
They do,
so.
yes.
So that's all good.
Yes.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Really enjoyed working with you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You'll get to continue.
And with that, I need a motion to approve Katie from DRPT joining the meeting. So could I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Thank you, Scott. Is there a second? Second from Natalie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So, Katie, you are now officially part of our meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome, dear. And the next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. It says announcements, but I don't have any announcements unless anyone else has an announcement.
I would move for approval of the agenda.
There you go. So next item is approval of agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so I will call for a voice vote for approval of the agenda. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So we now have an agenda. The next item are draft minute meetings, and these are from January. I don't know if anybody has any comments about the minutes. They were in your packet. And if not, then I would appreciate a motion to approve the minute from January the 25th.
I move for approval of the January 25th, 2024 meeting.
So, motion from Brian.
Second.
A second from Hal. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Folks, you got it? All right, so the minutes have been perfect. Lucinda, do we have anyone from the public that's?
We don't have anybody online. If there's anybody in the room who wants to make a public comment, you can do so now.
Looking around and make sure there's no one that signed up.
No, no one's, no.
All right. All right, then we are on to the big topic of the day, which is our governance study, the final report recommendations. And I think everybody at the table is aware that we've been looking at the studying the governance of what could very well be a regional transit authority. And we're looking at that through the lens right now from our consultants. So Stephanie, can you hear us okay? I'm not seeing you right now, but I'm going to turn the agenda over to you.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly?
Hear you as well. So we're going to turn this portion of the meeting over for your report, please.
Okay, excellent. And you can see me as well, I suppose?
And we can see your presentation.
Oh, okay. I have my camera on too. But thank you so much for your time. Thanks for inviting us back to discuss this very important topic. We've been having the whole of last year, we had several conversations and discussions with many of you in the room that are stakeholders, and had some RTP meetings as well, discussing the governance study, looking at transit governance in Region 10 in the Charlottesville area, trying to identify potential options for moving forward and improving transit in the region. And so for today's discussion, we are going to briefly, because it's been so long since our last meeting, we'll just do a brief overview of what the main goals are for this study, what the approach, and then dive straight into what the key findings and recommendations were. We'll just also look at the next steps and then have a time for questions if anyone in the room has them. So this study, as many of you know, it really came, it wasn't developed in isolation. It's been a progressive interest in improving transit in the region over the years. As far back as 2008, there was an initial study to look at establishing an authority in the region. This actually led to the RTP formation, which has been successful and has been partnering with the localities and working so far. In 2022, Albemarle also had a transit study to look at services in their region. And for the entire region, there was a transit vision plan. The purpose of this plan was to identify or to look at what transit could be like in the region. So additional services, what connectivity could look like, and how localities could collaborate on this. And so finally, last year, we began the governance study to dive a little deeper into those issues. Now, we started by looking at the existing conditions in the region. So right now, there are the three main providers. There's CAT, JAUNT, and UTS. Each one of them provides different types of services. But at the end of the day, we wanted to identify how we can leverage what is being done now and how to improve them. So we had discussions with each of the providers, with JAUNT, with CAT, and also with UTS. We looked at that and tried to merge it with the results from the Regional Transit Vision Plan. Now, the Regional Transit Vision Plan, it went through a very collaborative process to identify needs for the urban and rural areas. And so what we did then was to focus on one of the networks that was developed, which was based on potential additional funding in the region. That network included additional services increasing the types of services as well. And I believe you can find the final report on that on the TJPD website that goes into detail about the types of services and the improvements that are listed for both the urban and the rural areas. And so for this study then, we had two main goals. First, we wanted to review existing governance in the region. That is, looking at the existing service and try to identify options that have worked for other regions. Try to identify what are models that could be feasibly implemented in this area. Identify lessons learned from other transportation authorities in the Commonwealth. So looking at agencies like in NVTA or other similar type and agencies, the Hampton Roads as well, Williamsburg, and try to identify some lessons learned. We also wanted to know what kind of mechanisms can be implemented to ensure that the outcomes of any set authority is very effective and also protects the interests of the participating localities. The second piece of this study was also looking at potential revenue generation. How could we find additional funds for the increased service that we wanted to be provided by this authority? And so we also looked at potential funding streams and what is feasible in the context of the Commonwealth, what has been done, what has been permitted in the past. And again, looking at examples like from the Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia. Part of the entire process was we had a lot of engagement from the localities and other stakeholders. At the local level, we spoke to and interacted with all of the counties, the city, the operators, as well as the MPO. We also engaged at the state level with VDOT, some of the other peers that we studied, like the HR TAC and the Hampton Roads Transit, NVTA, WADA, representatives from DRPT, as well as VDOT, especially when it came to the revenue side, talking to them. And then finally, we also reached out to regions outside of Virginia, in Ann Arbor, Blacksburg in Virginia, but Bloomington, Iowa, Ithaca State College. They also had very similar conditions to the TJPDC region, where they have multiple transit providers, a large university or education institution, and some of them had some sort of consolidated services or were working independently but would coordinate very effectively. And so based on all of that, we were able to discuss that with the stakeholders and come up with some findings. Our general approach for the study, like I said, we started looking at the existing conditions. So what services are available in the region right now, and how are those services governed? Looking also at the funding available. Then we did the peer study analysis, which included the national peers as well as those from in Virginia, the existing transportation authorities. We went on to focus on identifying potential revenue generation options that could be viable in Region 10. And then lastly, we had several discussions and tried to identify some options that could work in this region. And so I'll just move on to the main findings from this study. The first one was understanding that with all the interaction, there is that general desire for transit governance. And so at the end of the study, what we recommended was activating, there's an existing legislation for the region that allows for setting up a transit authority called CARTA, is the Charlottesville Albemarle Transportation Authority. And it's available, by legislation, but it does not have any funding associated with it. And so what that allows is for the participating localities that agree or that want to be part of this to pass it at their local government levels. And that's a very simple way that they can set up or establish CARTA. And so the recommendation is in the interim, have that established CARTA as that interim entity that provides that forum for further discussion. We believe that having that will provide some momentum to continuing on the path of trying to identify additional resources for transit. At the beginning, we had some momentum towards the end of last year as to how this can be implemented in setting up a working group, a small committee or working group that can draft up the finalized bylaws and engage the localities that want to be involved in the beginning. We know that as of now, we want the initial members to be Charlottesville and Albemarle, and it's still open for any other locality to participate as they wish. And so once this is set up, this can become that forum for having those preliminary discussions and identifying potential role of entity and regional governance. You can confirm participation by other stakeholders in the region, the other localities, and have that structure in place. And so in looking at next steps, it would be setting up the work group, activate CARTA, which what is involved in that is the governing bodies at both localities passing a resolution to adopt CARTA as a transit authority, and then initiate the initial work. So drafting some of the action items, working on the transit priorities that were identified in the vision plan, but that would also include identifying at the detailed level, the administrative functions and how to handle initial costs, and sorting all of those details out before working on getting legislative support for for approval of a funding legislation, And so that is the main next step that we think can push this work further. The authority that we recommend would be ideally, so this is the ideal authority that we recommend is initial members as the city and Albemarle County, but also having the counties of Fluvanna, Green, Louisa, and Nelson, giving them an option to also opt in or to join the authority if they wish to do so, and having it governed by a board that is made up of elected representatives from each of the localities. The authority would have its role would be for transit planning for the region, to control transit funding as well, governance and oversight for transit activities in the region. Several other details on the roles of this authority, including they would have all the powers of other authorities that have been approved in the Commonwealth, such as being able to bond, being able to plan for transit in the region, enter contracts for service provision, or even having the ability to provide that service themselves if needed. We also talked about making sure that we put in place some mechanisms so that we can ensure accountability for this authority. We came up with a few options, mechanisms here. The first would be the representation that is inherently provided on the board by having representative elected officials, serve as board members, you have that representation, making sure that everybody's voice is heard. We also recommend setting up a technical advisory committee so that there could be participation from the other stakeholders such as DRPT, VDOT, the MPO, TJPDC, the operators in the region as well, including CAT and JAUNT. Also making sure that this, because it's a technical advisory committee, that the planning is informed by what is best needed for the region on a technical capacity rather than any other criteria. We also recommend that the authority would develop specific guidance and decision-making criteria for making investments in transit in the region, so that it's very objective and easy to explain to the residents of the region. Other mechanisms we've seen that work well in other transportation authorities are the financial reporting oversight and the funding oversight capabilities as well. Now, the second major point that we identified from the study was the need for a rural transit needs assessment. In several of our stakeholder meetings with the rural localities, we realized that the localities wanted to better understand what kind of transit they needed at a detailed level, wanted to understand the proportions of their population that need transit service so that they can make better decisions on how much they want to invest in transit as well. And so having a rural transit needs assessment, whether it is funded by the localities themselves or from another entity that would want to support this, or the operators, however it can be funded, it seemed like a very crucial next step to help bring all the rural localities on the same page as regards to transit needs in their localities. Next was the perceived control of transit governance in the region. So we have in Region 10, there's the urban side and the rural side, but we wanted to make sure that no one stakeholder felt left out or that their voice isn't heard, even as the authority continues. And so making sure that there's continuous engagement in the early stages of setting up CARTA as the interim entity, and with working toward drafting modifications for the General Assembly. And so making sure that, one, the needs assessment is carried out and is well understood by the rural stakeholders, but also ensuring that all the rural localities are still involved and engaged throughout the process. And lastly was collaboration with UVA. So during the study, we did engage with the university several times to understand the position that they could play in such an authority or in transit for the future. The peer studies that we looked at of other regions in the country that have major universities, we noticed that the university systems were often crucial partners to the region. And it many times provided financial resources for transit in the region. And so there could be arrangements for UVA to participate. But again, that would have to be based on discussions with all the stakeholders involved to decide the extent to which they want to participate and how they can be leveraged best for the region. The second major portion of this study was looking at potential revenue generation options. With this, we used as a starting point, we started first with how transit is funded generally across the United States, then narrowed it down to what we've seen being used in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So looking at HR TAC, MVTA, and then the recently implemented CVTA in Richmond. With those entities, what we saw that They are funded by a combination of the sales and use tax, grantus, fuel, the lodging tax, recordation, toll revenues, and other sources. Now with this, we had discussions with some stakeholders, including VDOT, to try to understand how the laws that have changed from 2020 through to 2023. There were some changes in laws in how money is allocated. And as a result of that, not all of these sources would be available for an authority for Region 10. For example, the fuel tax had the way the fuel tax is used in transportation has changed over the last 3 or 4 years. And so that may not be an available source right now. But after our research and our interviews with the stakeholders, we identified 4 sources as options for Region 10. Now, these are starting points, right? And the interim committee that is established can look at what is viable or what is better for the region as a whole. We saw that with these 4, the sales and use tax, the lodging tax, property tax, and real estate tax had potential to be used to fund transit. For each of the localities, we know that some of the rates differ. And so these are some of the discussion points that can be had in those working group meetings. And if there are other sources that might be even better, those can also be brought up. But in the final report, you can look at details on some of the estimates that were calculated on how much can be generated by locality for each of these funding sources as well. But yeah, this is a summary for the potential revenue that we saw. So to round up our next steps, we are hoping that this study is just the beginning of several more discussions and more engagement that can be had across the region. We are hoping that the next steps of setting up that working group can be implemented as quickly as possible so that the momentum can be kept up. And so continue the discussions with all the localities and stakeholders, set up the volunteer group, and establish CARTA. These steps, they are low-hanging fruit that can be implemented in a relatively short time to continue the momentum. But that is the end of my presentation now. The final report for this study has many more details on each of the topics discussed. And I believe that you can find that also on the TJPDC website. At this point, I can take any questions. Excuse me.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and we really appreciate you and your team's working with us on this important topic and study. And as she said, she's willing to take some questions. Let me just open it up here in a minute for questions that folks might have. Yes.
Hello, yeah, thank you for your presentation. On the last couple of slides when you were talking about revenue, there was taxes listed, but there were no user fees. What's the thought behind that?
Do you mean, just to make sure I understand your question, do you mean user fees in terms of the cost for service, like fare?
Yeah, fair.
Cost for fares. We know that generally rider fares are not a significant portion of the cost for running transit. They usually pay for a very, very little piece of the revenue for an entire agency. And that is just known fact across the country. In the Charlottesville region, there is some services also have no rider fees for now. And so if those policies would need to be reversed if we want to look at that. I believe there's some I don't want to make the wrong, it's either CAT or JAUNT has some services that are fare free. But again, those fares will account for very, very little of the total cost for providing service.
And I know that we are fare free at the moment, but was that something you thought about as a potential for future where maybe not fare free?
So like I said before, because of the contribution, the percentage that it would provide for the overall cost of running the service, it was not included here. But if that is something that that the localities or stakeholders think need to be reviewed in terms of the policy, I think is very open to it.
Stephanie, we've had
Open to it.
with this group in the past. I'm just gonna ask Garland, because he's spoken to us about that as well as Mike, to talk a little bit about the fares and their thoughts and where we are right now and their thoughts about fares.
So our fare model prior to us going fare free was 75 cents per ride. On a good year, we were clearing $300 to $400,000. That's a single digit 5-6%. I'm sorry, that was on a good year we're collecting $300,000 to $400,000. That's our fare box recovery ratio is what it's called. In single digits is probably 6-7%, which is terrible. Most transit agencies that charge are looking at close to 15 to 18%. We're not even close to that.
That's 18% of the cost to run that operation. That's not insignificant, 15 to 20%.
It's not, but it's, in the grand scheme of how much it cost us. Well, there was no push to raise the fare from 75 cents to something more appropriate. Because of that, it's always going to cost us more to run the system into that, unless there is appetite to raise that rate. If we raise our rate, then JAUNT can raise on the ADA side to double out there, which means they're only able to charge $1.50 for an ADA ride, and we were charging 75 cents. So it's, in the grand scheme, it's not a lot collection, and we're spending more for outside groups to collect the money, and we do all the necessary things to make our system work.
And I see Mike and Scott both noting that they had an agreement, because we talked about this before. It costs more to collect it than.
I would really emphasize where Garland ended, right, which is, collecting $300,000 when maybe it cost you that much or more to get the 300, and to track it, and extra admin, extra human beings, all of that thing, it would not be a good situation. And I'll just say, having had the pleasure of being a part of so many city council budget work sessions during the time where fares were debated, even the temperature check of the pallet to go to $1 from 75 cents was pretty much dead on arrival every single time. So, and I think if I can today, and I would just segue into my question about the report with some particular sensitivity to pages 34 through 36 based on, local government taxpayer dollars. I'm just wondering why these amounts were selected, right? For example, show me what a penny's worth in every locality on the real estate tax, not 10 cents worth, because 10 cents is like not real world thinking. I'm just wondering what the decisioning was around these figures. We were trying to get certain numbers, because I think actually this would present a little bit of a problem in messaging about the report because of the way this is packaged, for me at least.
So I don't know if I heard very well, but I wanted to just make sure I understood your question is looking at some of the estimates for the projections, why those percentages were chosen, and not linking it directly to the amount of service that'll be provided. Is that correct?
Not exactly. It's more so I'll take the last example first, which is towards the tail end of your report's numbering 36, right? Real estate, right? I could tell you that, the city's real estate tax generates somewhere between $1.08 $1.11 million for every penny on the rate, right? And so why are we jumping to this like 10 cents worth of increase? Because the idea that you would jump from 96 to 106 in order to fund this, I can say in 25 years, there would never have been the political appetite to consider such a jump.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Why not message it that way in the smallest increments possible? I just think it would be, when you go from RTP back out to the world to talk about this report, I think it would be easier to message about it in that way.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
Oh, no, if there's someone in the room that has another comment, I'd rather hear that first.
Scott, you might like to add something.
My comment was just in the fact that the fare box, I mean, the transition, I think, nationally to fare-free operations based on the arguments that these gentlemen just said, it's just kind of the way the industry's going. That was my comment.
Everything I've been reading is the same way, it's fair free. That's what folks are up there supposed to know. Kristen, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I can say specifically to the sales tax, it was just based on precedent, so that is what had happened at the other authorities, so we used that as the anchor. But point well received on the real estate tax, and that the smallest increment is probably the best way to then scale that up and down. So I take that suggestion. I think it was just, it really was just a number and an anchor, and then to start the discussion. You know, this report wasn't really gonna get at what those percents were gonna be, it was just to say, here's what the scale could be at this level.
I'm struggling with the 0.1%. Is that
So it's 10 cents.
10 cents?
Correct. So those percentages were selected, like Christine said, as an anchor. We were looking at what had been done in other areas for Richmond or for the Hampton Roads areas, and just using those figures as a starting point. Since these were to identify how much could be generated, but what would go into a proposal for the legislation would need much more detailed financial analysis. This study was primarily a governance study with a piece looking at options for revenue generation.
And while Stephanie's still here, because this is the last time we're going to have the opportunity to chat with Stephanie, I just want to make sure, are there any other questions around the table for Stephanie about the report? And then I have a suggestion for the group, something that might move us forward, but I don't want to cut questions to Stephanie from the group short if you all have any at this point. Yes.
I'm curious how the prioritization of an RTA would be in sync with the MPO of the municipalities.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
You mentioned that the RTA would prioritize projects. How would that work in tandem with the municipalities and the MPO that already do that process?
So the board of ideally the board of the authority would be elected representatives from each of the localities. We also mentioned having that technical input from the existing bodies in the region, such as the MPO or DRPT or even TJPDC. And so those advisory bodies would have input on the planning for transit projects in the region. And so in a way, yes, they're all working together, but then the final decision is given to the board of the authority.
If I could also chime in, one of the roles of the MPO is to prioritize infrastructure improvement projects. Part of that is also coordinating with the service providers. We'll make sure that that's incorporated into the planning process. But the service operations and the prioritization of service changes is kind of a different process outside of the long-range transportation plan, where there could be an opportunity for the RTA to take the lead role on that part of it.
Does that help?
It does, and the municipalities also, I mean, Albemarle County sets priorities for smart scale funding, et cetera, et cetera. How would that work with an RTA? Or is it too early a question to get into that detail?
I think it would come down to votes, right? And conversations and decisions and votes on the RTA.
Well, and in a way, we're used to those processes. In my head now, we work together through the MPO, and we're prioritizing projects now through that process. So I see us being able to do that. I see Mike nodding his head. I always like it when I'm talking to somebody's nodding their head.
As long as it's up and down.
I'm not out there on the other side.
Make sure I'm thinking about this right. If this goes forward, this would be something similar to the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority.
Or the Albemarle County, Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail Authority, yes.
And so the people that are appointed to that, and the various groups that, sort of the coalition of the willing, I guess, would have a work plan and set priorities and have to coordinate with their bosses back on their boards. Just like I'm accountable to the to my fellow councilors on the authorities that I'm a part of. So yeah, I don't know if that helps, but it would need to be something where that group was able to make choices.
And that's the process that we already have with other authorities established. And so I think the community is used to that process. So it would be, somebody had their hand up over here. Oh, Norm, yeah.
So I'm just saying, I come from a system that actually transitioned to, GRTC transitioned to having a transit authority that takes the funding. They have to make presentations, they have to coordinate with the jurisdictions, get their wishes and incorporate that into a plan, because there are actually multiple things they do. So the jurisdictions don't get cut out. There are actually more levels of checks and balances we put this authority.
Any other questions or comments to Stephanie? Yes, Peter.
This may be for the RTP, not for Stephanie. Forgive me for just joining in the last couple months. So the Central Virginia Authority is a transportation authority, not a transit authority. Was it the RTP's decision that this is going to be a transit, not a transportation authority?
This is a question that's come up throughout, and the study that was done back in 2008 was solely around coordinating transit. And then as the RTP came about, it was also, excuse me, to find a solution to transit. This is never at least the incubation of this has never been about greater transportation planning. And much of the discussions that have occurred are talking about the scale of funding and what the potential is and whether it would dilute the impact to what we could do with transit if we had a true transportation authority like several of the peers.
I mean, that would be my guess, but also the discussion about transportation broadly is a more interesting conversation with rural localities than the conversation about transit.
And we did discuss that in all individual meetings.
That was a big part of the discussion.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. Great question, thank you, Peter. Any other questions?
I would like you to help us understand how we should be using some of the national peers that have been identified as we think about projects. Something that leaps off the page to me is most of them, the localities are hardly paying anything, which is compelling as we're sitting here talking about how we're going to pay for this with a 10-cent property tax.
Right. Well, we're in the middle of budget cycle right now.
But like I look at some of them, and there's no locality contribution, I think, from Blacksburg's program. and they're almost all entirely led by federal grant monies. I'm like, oh, I would like that. I would actually like that. So I guess my question is just how do we broadly use this? Should we be thinking about, oh, can we get HOAs to work to do contracts? Because I see that's something that one of them is doing. I guess I'm just not sure how to approach this as something we're using for our own company.
Stephanie, I'll throw that to you.
So your question is, how do we use some of the findings from the peers, the national peers, and how do we apply that to the context here? Is that correct, in the Charlottesville area?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think some of the key things that we identified from there were interesting discussion points as we continued to chat with the stakeholders. So you mentioned the Blacksburg example, for instance, and I'm sure everyone would love if UVA decided to do the same as Virginia Tech, but it probably would not. But it still gave us the starting point to chat with them about what their role could potentially be here. If we are talking about creative ways to contract with other entities that we may not necessarily look at to generate some form of additional funds, that creative funding, that's where we looked at some of the contracts with the different apartment complexes or housing complexes. One of, I think, the more interesting findings would be how with the regions that started as separate entities but ended up working together as a combined authority, those ones provided better direction on what it would look like for this region to move forward in that. So for example, one of the peers had a situation where they had two separate entities, but as they continued to coordinate more on administrative as well as service, moved into a building together, started sharing some of those administrative functions. We could look at what could that look like in this region, in Region 10. After a couple of years of working side by side in the same building, they decided to integrate more and more functions, and then becoming one consolidated agency. And so I think with some of those examples, it gives guidance on how we can move from where we are today to the future state that we want, whether we want to leapfrog from where we are now to one authority, or we want to go in stages of setting something up now, looking at what that looks like with the existing operators. How do we deal with the funding we currently generate with that comes from the federal or the state sources? How do we want to consolidate that to make sure that everything is streamlined? Or do we want to continue the processes we have now? So I think those are some of the areas that we could focus on. And again, those peer, what we saw from the peer studies were suggestions on what other areas are doing with their university partners and could be potentially discussed with UVA if they do choose to be part of this system.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments or questions?
Just one is to check an assumption. If CARTA was formed, the RTP would fold, disband. And so if CARTA was formed, I understand the governing body being the people that are recommended makes sense, but I'm wondering if we would consider non-voting members like the RTP has to get other stakeholder involvement as the RTPs have.
And those decisions would have to be made, yeah. And that's a good jumping off point because the RTP was established with the intent of moving eventually to an authority. We all recognize that transit in this community was not working for everybody, and we certainly had struggles. We also recognize that in order to build a robust transit system, we have to have money. And the localities cannot continue to take the money for transit from their operational, because if we continue to do that, we're not going to have a robust transit system. So the way to get at funding for transit in our community is to form an authority. And so we're at that tipping point right now of with the good work of Stephanie and her team and all the good work that's happened around this table for the last year, 4 years? Maybe 5 years. Anyway, we're at the point where I think decisions can be made to move us forward towards, hopefully, an authority. Hard to say at this point. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's time to start that process. And I hope that folks around this table would agree. And with that comment, I'd like to request that the staff from the City of Charlottesville and the staff from Albemarle County and TJPDC begin preliminary discussions about the formation of a regional transit authority that would include discussions of bylaws, engagement with potential partners, agencies, and the structure. That staff would be meeting over the next 90 days and come back to us within 90 days with recommendations. If you look at, and the reason I'm suggesting that it's the city and the county staffs, if you look at the document in your packet that we have, that's Appendix F, our charge as we were created, it says on page 2, and this is a great document for everybody to pull out and read at some point, but it says, the City of Charlottesville and the County of Albemarle shall be the initial members of the authority upon adoption of an approving ordinance or resolution by each of their respective governing bodies. So that's the place that we need to get to. We as a board here, as a board set up as we are right now, we can't do that. So I'm suggesting that the TJPDC help the city and the county in working with, the staff working together over the next 90 days, and then come back to us with some recommendations.
Diane, that text you read is from the Carter legislation?
It is, it's from the state.
That was approved back in 2008?
Yes, it's right, it's Code of Virginia. And I would like to just maybe throw it off. Christine, could you speak a little bit perhaps to this? Because to the staff and getting together.
Yeah, it actually stems kind of well from the last question that was asked, is because, certainly I don't see a future where there's an RTA and an RTP side by side, but you could see the RTA creating the subcommittees like citizen advisory and or other stakeholders, that are advising the RTA. So I think there's a way to do that. I would agree that I think the next steps to keep it moving is to get staff in a room and start digging into the details. I think we've all been kind of at a point where we're ready to do that, pushing up our sleeves. We needed to see this process through and this study completed. But now I think it's getting into the details and figuring out what are the questions that we need to be asking that we don't yet have answers to, and seeking the answers to those questions.
And the staffs would be coming back to this group. And eventually, we're going to have resolutions that will go to Charlottesville City Council and Albemarle County Board of Supervisors for approval to actually move the authority into place. And we know that we're going to probably need, I guess, Christine, I would call them some small changes to our authority that the state has given us. And we want to be ready for the next legislative session. Because if we miss the next legislative session next January, we're waiting another year. So to be able to do the work this spring, this summer, this fall, and be prepared to present to our legislators what we're thinking. And we have to figure out that governance model and where the money is going to come from. We can't go to the legislators and just say, we want an authority, but we have no idea what we're So we have to have that handled out.
I said to Mike's point, is this report just going to stay here rather than going to city, county publicly and potentially frighten people before we make a case for it with this 10-cent increase? Curious. It's somewhat public because we're a public body already. I'm not suggesting it can be hidden, but I'm wondering.
I
Go ahead.
hear Mr. Murphy's point. To me, I look at this and it's just data. We're in a process right now where maybe increasing taxes not make sense, but
And no decisions have been made, it's a report, it's recommendations from the consultant, but I don't think, that this is not something that everything.
It's a menu of options, it's not a prescription,
No, that's
as
right.
far as I can tell.
But the plan's not to present it to city council and the county board at this time. Is that
No.
correct?
No,
They've already seen these
Yeah.
numbers.
yeah,
It has already been presented to them.
Did this report has?
These numbers early in the process as we came out to each of the governing boards to walk through the steps.
But not in a public forum where the public digests it. I'm trying I'm not suggesting we hide stuff from the public. I'm just also trying to be responsive to Mike's good point that we don't want to skip.
No, it's presented to us that way. Now, having said that, this final draft has not been presented to them, but we've had the discussions, yes, and the information, yes.
Well, I think that the language here is important, that this was a discovery process and this is data. Those tables are not recommendations.
No.
You know, it's not coming out saying we should do a 0.7% increase or raise 10 cents. It's saying, here is an anchor. If you did this, this is what it would generate. And then the discussions have to happen on, what is feasible, what's realistic.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it personally. As a council, I don't know how.
Well, and the reason that the 90 days was determined, the way we came up with the 90 days when we were thinking about how to make this happen, we're both of Charlottesville and Albemarle County is in the middle of budget cycle right now. So we felt like 90 days would give our staffs enough time to meet and have some breathing space while we're doing this work and also the work of the budgets that both localities are in the middle of. I don't know, Ann, if you want to say anything, but.
No, and those that work in local government, and the board members that support that function, and we work to provide them with that information. It's just a pretty labor-intensive process right now.
Is 90 days even
I think the thought was 90 days is,
And it could be that we're able to frame out what the important discussion points are, be able to do some drafting, and it may not be a fully completed process, but we at least identify what are the big and the important discussion points that we need to have. It's a starting point.
Question on process.
Yes.
Thinking about taking board direction for staff engagement, typically that comes through a board meeting with a consensus of the board. Should that be a step before we invest staff's time to make sure the city council and the board are aligned?
We can certainly do that.
And sometimes, as board report out on committee activities, it can come up in that framework, or
Speaking for the city, and we're here if you disagree, but I don't have any problem. I mean, we've been talking about this internally for a long time. There's consensus, I think, not on all the specifics, but at least the general idea. And I don't have any problem asking Sam Sanders to at least begin this process of a discussion. The only thing I would feel like we needed sort of formal approval on as we got to the end.
Absolutely.
No, I appreciate your point.
Yeah, I do too. We could do that, Trevor, but I would say that Sam was talking at the recent chamber meeting about the need to get to an authority. I know that Jeff Richardson and Sam have been talking about this and have identified the folks that they think should be at the table. So and certainly our board, from the board of supervisors level, well, we haven't agreed to anything. I think it's been hard, and there are no decisions that have been made. We have certainly agreed that we were going to go to the next step and talk about it because we're going to do transit for that, figure out what it is.
It's part of our strategic plan, and not an RTA per se, but transit is,
So I don't have any problem with if there's consensus around the board. Now, we can go back if we have that consensus today, then, we will be able to.
I think we could, if people gave us a consensus, we could report back to
Sure.
our colleagues that we got consensus, but strictly speaking, in terms of the law, what's been written, we can go to our respective organizations and say, let's get moving and look at others to come aboard.
Right. And it does say, after what I just read about city and the county, the initial members of the authority upon adoption of approving ordinance or resolution, then the next item down says counties of Fluvanna, Green, Louisa, Nelson, they join the authority and the authority should, and that would be the next step. So part of our work as we move through this process would be talking to the surrounding counties and the UVA. But first, by law, Albemarle and Charlottesville need to get this.
So would it be helpful to you, Supervisor McKeel, to, not for us to have a vote on this, but just a sort of, I don't know, acclamation or whatever the term might be, that we all think this is a great idea, that it's the recommendation of the RTP that this be adopted in the next steps.
Consensus.
And what do you think? I'm going to turn to you and folks.
Right, I would think that if there were consensus of this group, that would be the next logical step. We could certainly go back and work with Supervisor McKeel to inform our board of the work, and that those in Charlottesville could inform their board as well, that those were the next steps that we were taking to go forward.
And then additionally, as an advisory body, you're making the recommendations out to your governing boards, but we're also taking it back to the planning district commission. So ultimately, the commission also has to accept this report and then have consensus that they want the PDC to continue investing resources and staff time into this process, and that'll happen at the RP.
And I will say, my understanding is, because you and I have talked several times about funding and your all support of this work. And for right now, it's not going to require an additional funding between now and the summertime, July.
Yes, we're still on funding that you all have given us, MPO funding, we still have enough to get us through this fiscal year.
In July 1, we'll start a new budget cycle, but you're okay right now, because you'll certainly be helping to staff this.
Yeah, one of the differences is we will no longer have VRPP grant funding to support administrative firms.
So at some point it will have to be discussed, but for right now.
So if this is not helpful, we still need to be quiet. Would it be worth a sort of, would it be worth our endorsing this report and suggesting that it be taken forward, so that this body has sort of given some sort of something,
Yeah, I think that's probably needed.
Knowing that it's a study, to Mr. Murphy's point, this is not a roadmap in terms of revenue.
This is just the next step along our 4 or 5 year journey that we've had towards an authority. And we're taking each step at a time, thinking it through, working out with our community and with but this particular step would be with staff and a report coming back to us with possible recommendations.
And just so that, I guess to pare it back, the idea of this working group would really be able to begin to sort of frame out what are the important points that we need to discuss, what not to
make decisions.
Right, not to make decisions, maybe do a little bit of drafting using some of the examples that were provided in the report of bylaws. But it's really some of that basic staff work that has to go on if the effort continues to move forward.
And I would like at some point for this group, if in fact when the recommendations come back to us, that perhaps there would be a draft of the resolution that we would need to take to our governing bodies. That might be one charge that we would have. If in fact we decided to do that, we would have that resolution.
I guess I'm thinking about what kind of specific deliverable are we expecting in 90 days? And what I've been kind of assuming when I heard this was draft bylaws, draft resolution, and identified parties, and maybe even a messaging document. Do we think that's prudent at this stage? Because I recognize that a key thing that I'm ensuring is that this is not a messaging document, and we will need such a thing for any kind of finding public action. So I'm wondering if that is something we're saying is.
Prospectus of perform or something like that.
Well, I mean, frankly, like our budget is like 20% messaging document, 80% budget, right? Or rather, it's 100% budget, and then we have a messaging document that precedes it. And I'm wondering, we have the budget, and I'm wondering if it might be part of what we need in 90 days to have the messaging document, because I see that as kind of an essential part of it. Also, just frankly, me doing my job of not alarming every household in my rural area when they see .1.
Well, if people are concerned about the .1, I guess we could ask them to propose a quick amendment to the document. It doesn't bother me because I think I see it as data, but if there's concern with other elected officials that this is going to freak people out.
I don't think it does. I'm drawing that out as an example of why we need separate information messaging, right? Because I don't expect, with respect to the constituents listening, I don't expect most people in the county to just be like, oh, let me go turn to page 86 out of 138 of this report to see what the tax tables say.
So Christine, what would you, I think you touched on this earlier, but what would you see as deliverables in this exercise?
I think it's reasonable for us to, 90 days is not a long time. You know, there's a lot going on in the next 90 days, so I want to be not over-promising something. I think it's going to require a series of meetings across those 90 days, even to read all of the staff or whomever is going to be involved into this process. Certainly folks have been at the table along the way, but we've got new people at the table, we've got new directors, so I think it's going to take a little bit just to get us there. I think it's reasonable to have a list of, here are the things that we need to do next. I think 90 days is a check-in of we're continuing to work on this. We are moving this ball forward, but I don't know that we're going to come back with, here's the tax scenario we recommend, here's how it's going to be allocated, and this is the draft resolution and the bylaws. I don't think that's reasonable.
That's fine.
I think a draft resolution makes sense. I think an outline of all of the continued discussions and decisions that are going to need to be made by the governing boards and by an authority, I think those are reasonable.
And at the end of the day, everything will go back to the Board of Supervisors and the City Council for decisions, right?
For decisions to.
We are an advisory board here. We can't, it's up to City Council and the Board of Supervisors ultimately to approve a resolution. So,
And this doesn't quite work in with the 90-day timeline, but in mid-April, City Council is having a transportation work session update sort of thing, so that
Next week.
And the RTA is actually a topic, sorry, you guys set aside for that work session, so we'll have more information.
alternative fuels next week, transportation.
so do we need one, so going forward then, now, yes.
I just want to ask Stephanie a question. Stephanie, can you give me a little feedback of what you are experienced when you talk to the rural counties, Urbana, Albemarle, Nelson, Louisa? What was their, reactions? Can you capsulize that?
Yes. So we had several rounds of discussions with the rural localities, and some of the concerns they raised was the first one was needing to better understand the transit needs in their areas. They felt like they didn't quite know how much service they needed, and if the improvements that were even suggested by the vision study, that is increasing service to 7 days a week, increasing the number of hours that the service was running throughout the week, and adding different routes within the localities, and then also connecting to the urban areas. They wanted to understand how they would benefit from those additional routes. And that's what led to the recommendation of having that rural needs assessment. Some wanted to even know the people within their localities that use transit. They wanted to feel like if they were going to contribute to this new authority, that they were getting what was best for their residents. And so there was a lot of hesitation in making any official promises, but they are interested in being part of the discussion as it continues to evolve. But before they make any judgments, they want to make sure that they understand their role in terms of control as well as their role in terms of benefit to their localities. I think that could summarize it.
That's fair, because I think that's what we heard from them at this table.
Right, okay. That's fair.
I like the way the enabling legislation is set up with Albemarle and Charlottesville being the shall and the rural localities being an invitation. So like as far as the initial process, there's like a standing up the entity process and there's a building a business plan, which is a much harder piece. And I could imagine the rural localities also wanting to participate, some in the development of the entity, but much more on the business plan piece of it. And so you should check in with them before writing the charter, but the enabling legislation doesn't require that they be all on board for the full picture before you do anything.
And certainly, and we could get the authority going, to be honest with you, and they could join at different times even, as they felt like it. And I don't want to leave UVA out, because we certainly we're talking about the rural localities and the other jurisdictions, but we certainly feel like UVA would be important to be at the table as well.
Absolutely, and I'll just say briefly, I mean, I support the direction that this is going in. It's logical, it makes sense that sort of you start in the center and work your way out. Obviously, we're in the center there too, but the legislation makes sense to start with Charlottesville and Albemarle, so.
Yeah.
Well, I would move to, that we as a body endorse this government study report.
Okay, all right. I will take that perhaps as a, should I take that as a motion? Yes, let's take that as a motion.
And if people aren't prepared to, if people feel like they, I don't know, I think that we should endorse this.
I would second that. I think we just need to, as Christine outlined, it's move, we're gonna get some kind of a product in 90 days, not a full-blown, letting to be able to go forward with legislation, but at least more discussions that we can, or information we can take back to our communities.
And it's an endorsement, it's not, it's not signing on any dotted lines, it's, we've heard this and we basically are in agreement with what's been suggested.
The next step towards an authority, but to see where it takes us, and we're going one step at a time. And we're following what is in state code that we need to do and when we need to do it. So I have a motion, I have a second. Hal seconded, could I just have a voice vote of all those in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We've got it, guys. This is great. Give ourselves a big round of applause.
Mr. Kilkins has a question for process. Will PDC be the convener of this staff group to work for these next 9 days?
Yes, happy to facilitate that.
I think it would be good, and I do think it's reasonable to put that together to help scope this, identify obstacles, challenges, and engagement.
Yeah, and Anne's been very involved in this. So we're good. Yeah. Oh, right.
Diane, I'm sorry to have so many questions, David. Can I have two others?
Sure.
So one, when you mentioned budget earlier, I can't imagine what this would be, but knowing the city and county are doing budgets, might there be any need to allocate any dollars in fiscal year 26 to move the process forward?
So that'll be part of the discussion, and we'll be figuring that out. Christine has said right now, they don't need any additional dollars right now to move us through this next step.
But that would be part of the groups to think might there be any need for dollars in the next 15 months?
Well, at some point, we have to talk about that, yes.
It's just probably too early to have that discussion.
I don't know what it would look like, but knowing that the budget's gonna run out and then you're gonna have a year with no money.
Yeah.
And the other question, just because a big part of my job is reporting back to 25 CAA partners and all of their stakeholders. People are gonna ask, okay, now what's the timeline? Do we have any idea if everything moved forward, when this might be created?
Well,
We're talking about
from my
12 months?
understanding, we're gonna need to go to General Assembly next session.
Next.
So if you think about it in those terms, Christine, I would say that it'd be very hard to get a definite.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the ambitious goal would be to get it before General Assembly this session. I think we have also, most of the people in this room understand it might take more than one bite at the apple to be successful. So I'm hesitant to say, we could be up and running in.
But the earliest would be next year's General Assembly.
So I would
We're
say.
still talking a year out. I just again checking the assumptions so I can answer questions.
Because we do know we have to go to General Assembly.
I figured, I just, again, checking my assumptions. It helps for me to communicate to others. Thank you.
To that point, does the General Assembly deadline,
Hold on a minute, there's too many people talking at one time, I'm sorry.
so does that GA deadline include the business plan piece or just establishing the organization with its bylaws and all that? Because those are two very different things. Like the localities may want to take a good while to decide, do they want to increase taxes, all that stuff.
That's gonna be an important conversation, and that, 90 days does not include all that.
And my point is that the GA deadline doesn't even require that, correct? It's
So the GA deadline is for raising the money, like county authority for bonds.
I see, okay, got it.
I would think within this calendar year, we should certainly be able to get the local legislation needed to activate what we've already been given.
So those are two pieces,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So then like the getting to work
Yes.
might wait till the next session.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yep,
Yeah.
That's good.
perfect, thank you.
I actually do have, that sparked a question from me, I apologize, I'm here for a long time, because I might direct this to people with more expertise in our group here with other regional ambulatory general assembly language. I think I might assume that a fairly fleshed out business plan that has consensus among the localities to be taxed would be an essential part of what we go to the general assembly. I would expect that if I was a general assembly law.
I would think that if we went to them without that, they would say, well, and then they start asking us
They would
questions.
say, oh, we don't have to go to 266.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so do we feel like Christine, we're good, and we're all good on this? So, because it is time, I'm your official outkeeper, so I want to just move this on if I can. Because we do have, our next item, is the Blue Ridge Health District Community Health Improvement Plan.
Jen Fletcher, we are behind, and Jen offered to present at the next meeting if you wanted to, or she can present that.
Well, that's tempting.
Yeah.
If you're offering.
Yeah, I'm
All
all
right. Good point was brought up to me. Stephanie, are you still there? We want to make sure that we're moving on to the next item. Sometimes we don't mean to forget people on Zoom, I apologize. But we really appreciate your help, and you probably it was probably interesting for you to listen to our discussion. So we're pleased that you stayed. And thank you very much for your help. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well, but I think the gist of it, thank you very much again. It was a wonderful.
And have a lovely weekend.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so is there consensus then to ask Jen to come back at our next meeting? She has graciously agreed to do that and offered. So we changed the agenda and moved this item to our next agenda.
Sure, just put it on first so she doesn't get.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it, Jen.
No
We
worries.
hope you enjoyed the discussion as well.
Very much so.
Good, that's all. It's all good. Then I'm gonna move on if we can to our transit provider updates. William, You are on first, and that's not fair because this is your first report out.
I don't mind.
You sure? Because I was gonna say, I can get Scott to go next if you want.
So I can just tell you what I'm thinking. If you need something, some additional information, please feel free to ask. So, what's of interest is our electric buses. So we have 4 in play right now, and they are kind of tethered to our urban ring. I did look today, and we have accumulated 24,000 miles of usage out of those units. And we're estimating because of our software has some glitches in it right now that's tracking our kilowatt hour usage. So we're estimating our fuel consumption at about $7,800 for those miles. And if we just did a quick comparison back to diesel, and what that would cost us per gallon, so that would be about $13,000. So there's some savings from a fuel perspective, but there are other costs associated with electric buses that we haven't realized yet. One of those being the annual service requires a kit. That's about $2,000 per bus for that annual maintenance, and we still have to go through our every 45-day service with that, which is much less than what we do on a diesel bus. So we're still getting to know those units, and they're starting to learn us. One of the biggest challenges we've had is with the 12-volt charging system. As we've heard on the news with Tesla, they've taken some hits on the low temps, and when that 12-volt system is not working, the batteries don't charge. And we had that issue several times, and so that's something that we're going back to our OEMs and saying you need to implement that design feature in future models. So we're doing a workaround now. We had that happen just this week at temperatures just under 30 degrees, where the battery, the 12-volt system died over the weekend, and the bus was not ready on Monday morning.
And we have a lot of those temperature warnings.
We do.
Yeah.
We absolutely
That's
do.
not 2 degrees, I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we're getting a lot of positive feedback from staff and from the community. They love the buses. It's even impacting student management.
Yeah.
The buses are being a lot quieter than our diesel units. The drivers are able to redirect verbally much better on those units. So that's where we are with electric. Our staffing, we're still recruiting. We are managing to cover all of our routes now, but that's through utilization of all of our resources. So we don't even have a projection because we have consolidated routes, since COVID so drastically. We don't really have a projection of what staff would look like. But we are still aggressively recruiting, and we're seeing a much lower level of interest from applicants. So we feel like we've fished the pond pretty thoroughly, and we need to figure out what's the next thing that is going to attract folks to want to do this work.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
You said 24,000 miles of usage so far. In what time period?
So we've had, so our last unit just went into play less than 30 days ago. Our first unit has been in play for 11, maybe 12 months. So within a year, but not all 4 of those units being in play.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions for William about this? This is really great information.
Hey, Lynn, did you say that, so the buses are not, tell me more about this 12-volt issue. Are they staying charged, are they staying connected? And they're still having those issues when they're connected to the charging system?
So 2 separate charging systems, right? So the 12-volt battery is just like the battery in your car,
right,
or in our diesel buses. They are not connected to the charging infrastructure that runs the bus. right? And so when temperatures drop and those buses are sitting, just like this weekend or over a weekend, that 12 volt, when it drops voltage, it automatically kicks off the charging. So what we've learned is that now we have to have a workaround, so we have to have a trickle charge on our 12 volt to keep that up so that our main charging system doesn't disconnect.
And is the solution to, I'm just curious, is the solution software related, like the update so that, hey, the system knows when the temperatures are low to not allow that to happen?
It's actually, the two aren't connected at all. So the 12 volt system is not connected to anything except communication, right? And so those two systems have to be up. So the batteries that drive the bus, they can only drop to 85%, or we can only use 85%. That last 15% is left in reserve. It will kick the charging off if we drop below that. And then if the 12 volt drops charge, then it automatically disconnects the charger.
And who's the manufacturer? I'm just curious of the buses that you have.
Sunny Merriman. So yeah, these are Freightliners.
I think almost all the buses in the state come from Sunny Merriman.
Yeah. So they're first in. They're first in. Bluebird has been around for a while with electric, but they have not been a supplier choice. Kingmore is just coming online. The IC bus is just coming online, and there's some other vendors that are out there, but they're not well known in our part of the country.
It is interesting, I found it amazing that when I took a ride around in an electric bus in Albemarle County and in the urban area, the driver said to me, she said, I love these electric buses because the kids behave so much better. She said, discipline is so much better. And it's counterintuitive, you think, well, why in the world? But, and you point that out too, so that's held up. Because I was wondering if after 30 days, that would change, but.
Yeah, so it did change a little bit, but we're still seeing a better result.
Yeah.
Right, and a lot of it all has to do with the driver. The driver, kind of sets the tone for the student management, but it certainly helps when you're not talking over the noise.
You can be calmer and quieter.
Correct.
Yeah. Any other questions for Lynn? Is that it? You're more than welcome to have it. We actually have a freer agenda now than we did, so if you want to take a little bit more time.
That's all I have.
Okay. All right. Then, Scott, you're on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, both of the items that I think I addressed last week are still basically, or last month, they're still, we started the meeting by saying, I feel like it was just last week. We are still in the process for reviewing our transit vehicle tracking software system. Nothing really I can share on where we'll land on that. So that's still underway, and then I think your question led me to kind of reveal that we had, with the Proterra bankruptcy, canceled the contract, and so we are moving ahead. We are looking at all of our options and doing calls to other providers, other schools that have electric buses, other schools that have received grant funding to do it, and so sort of everything's in play right now. We do intend to submit a grant request with this year's April 25th deadline for low and no emission vehicles. But aside from that, we are still probably going to pursue, we're just assessing really the other two major providers, which are New Flyer and Gilly for battery electric buses. Our charging system is not quite yet fully in place. It will be very soon though, I'm being told. I think I might have said that last month as well, but we're getting there. Right now I've parked our two Chevy Bolts that our department owns in there to sort of say, we're ready to use it, guys, just finish the project.
Yeah.
So.
Any questions for Scott?
Is there any conversations, and we're talking alternate fuels next week, any conversations y'all might could have or have had about having some compatibility about at least charging. I assume that these charging devices are bespoke or tailored or unique enough that it's per bus type, I guess, or is there like a common kind of chassis or whatever that can be?
So, to answer first part of your question, once we get direction from council, we have a robust conversation with the other providers. So, once we have that direction, if the direction is to go one way or the other, and if it's more on the battery electric side, I think it is very appropriate to have a conversation specifically with UTS. The charging for big buses is much different than charging for like on the smaller vehicles. So
two different types of buses then?
No, we run the same type, we run the same buses. We actually both run those. So that's not to say we're both gonna buy Gilly battery electric. So there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. Once we have a direction, a clear direction, I think it is, but it's also, charging, a full charge is between 5 and 8 hours. Even fast charging, only from what I've seen, is 2 to 3 hours. It's not 5 minutes, it's not 30 minutes. Fast charging means like cut that time in half normally. So there still has to be real planning about key locations for potential charging stations. And if we're gonna do something like that, fast charging, it's still a top off, it's not, you're not filling it in.
Yeah, and I know whether we ever heard of like fully integrated systems between the city and the university, I don't know in terms of routes and so on, but it would be cool if your guys were, running low and they were able to pull over to the university and get a top up or whatever, or vice versa, if there was some compatibility with those infrastructure.
For sure, and I think, but we also, in that I wasn't here for that, and even in the last 2 years when it was done, there's a change. What we did, we compared the providers in 2021 and 2022 through CalSTART, which is they're an organization that does this sort of, they did the modeling based on the battery sizes, the charging infrastructure, our routes, our specific routes, terrain, and they modeled. Now, as I said to our sustainability committee yesterday at UVA, that was modeling. We're desperate to really see a bus operate one of our routes and get real experience. So, trying to make lemonade out of the lemons of canceling our Proterra buses, as I said, I think I said this last month, we have the chargers, or we will very soon. We want to get a bus here and say, we've got chargers now, so let's test it.
Chargers are different from one model to another, or?
No, they're all this. In fact, they're the same. The plug is this. What's different is the 300 amp cable. It's like a snake.
Oh,
it's
but the size of the buses.
Correct. Yeah, the actual plug and I assume the school buses is the same as a CCS plug, which if you have anything besides a Tesla in America right now, or an older Nissan Leaf, you have a CCS connector.
Okay, well, that's good.
I mean, and I don't want to jump into the.
No, but I'm saying, I think the point that he made is, which is what we're trying to express, is the testing is really important before we spend a lot of money on infrastructure and go full board on buying a product without knowing the reliability on it. In talking with my counterparts around the country, there are issues even with the bigger buses at 27 degrees and below. For some reason, that's a magic number. There are causing some issues in certain places. We want to be able to test and see how it applies here. But there are other ways for Charlottesville and this region to get to zero emissions, if that is our goal, besides just battery electric. There are systems around the country who have been doing other products for decades. the products, other products work. We just have to be, we have to be mindful of what we want to do. And if we're gonna go one direction or the other, there's a lot of time, energy, and infrastructure costs associated with both models. We will have availability in getting some grant, but that is not, that's a drop in the bucket. There's gonna be requests from CAT to do outbill, for infrastructure and all sorts of things if we go one direction or the other.
And I don't want to muddy the waters, but I thought I just read in the Post recently that Washington was cutting back on some of the grant funding for electric buses based on concerns or something like that. And I don't want to start rumors here, but.
So, I sent, city council some videos from Champaign-Urbana, systems, where the University of Illinois. And they are, they've been doing battery electric, and hydrogen for a decade now.
Right.
And they actually moved to the next iteration of hydrogen.
Yeah.
And the federal government, the actual administrator for FTA actually was there at their kickoff. That's rare that she does that. But it's just showing that a number of transit agencies are incorporating, they have battery electric, they're incorporating an additional because they need a separate backup in case this model doesn't always work, they have something to run all the time.
And hydrogen is an interesting, very interesting. Yeah.
I want to just make a quick point, based off of, what Rick was talking earlier about messaging, just messaging in general, when you say zero emissions bus, zero emissions goals, we have to remember that if we're plugging something in, it's not zero emissions until Dominion is 100% renewable. So as we're communicating with people, and as they're advocating strongly for one way or the other, we have to remember that we have to think about the net as well as local.
And I like it. And I would like to say, adding on to that, getting to zero emissions, and we're adding, which we would probably have to do, a heater. That's a deep to make sure that we don't drain the battery factor. And with the cold climate that we're in, we're not gonna be able to run buses if we don't have the diesel heaters on top of the gas.
Right. We're not as cold as we used to be, but we're still too cold for what you're doing. Yeah, I got it. Okay, any other comments about this? If not, then I'll move us, Scott, thank you very much. I'll move us on. Garland, you can continue, you have Cat and Cat in the City.
So I'll start with schools first. We've been working with them to see if there's appetite to potentially do a pilot for 2 school buses, battery electric. We're gonna put in a grant submission working with the Office of Sustainability to make that model happen. So that's progress. Looking at that potential model on the battery electric, which works really well under charging in the morning, in the middle of the day when you charge again, and then run your routes morning and afternoon. On the transit side.
Hey, Garland, before you move on, so I'm working with some high school kids that are following this issue. Should they get in touch with Crystal or with you, or who would they talk to if they're interested in learning more about the school bus pilot potential?
So let's see if we get it.
Okay.
And
Thank
so
you.
What we're working on right now is pulling together the plans.
Gotcha.
So the grant application needs to happen within by the end of this month. So we're working figures when we get that done. If we're successful, we will be granted 2. So that would be our tax outline on the school bus side.
But the we here is CAT that's working on that.
It's actually the Office of Sustainability in conjunction with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you're on for your.
On transit side?
Yeah.
All right, so transit, Tuesday next week, we're having our follow-up to our alternative fuel study recommendations. At that point, the city council will actually have an opportunity to hear from the Office of Sustainability and neighborhood development services. Will actually be at the table. This wanted to make sure we emphasize this has not been an effort just by CAC. This has been an effort by multiple city agencies looking at how do we get these zero emissions. So I think it's making sure that all parties have the ability to kind of weigh in and make sure that all parties understand where we are in this model, and make sure we present all of the facts and all the information that City Council would like to have. The goal for this would be to allow City Council to ask any questions they can, get all the information, and hopefully come out of there with opportunity to get a recommendation, to either tell us the direction they would like for us to go, because their recommendation is the next piece that we need to finish our transit strategic plan. It ties together, so we can't complete the strategic plan without the direction of the council about these vehicles. So that part is in the strategic plan. Yep. Once we finish that component though, it allows us to chart our path through the transit strategic plan for the next 10 years. That is not set in stone. We do have an ability to make annual updates, but we do need to make sure that we're running in the direction, which is why the study has been done. The study sets our marching orders for next year. But we need to pivot from that based on if we're going to do pilots. If we are able to pivot from that whatever is in that study, whatever sources are in that study, will give us the ability to pivot from one direction to another. If it's not in the study, it actually causes more problems for us to potentially choose a different route if it's not in the study. And I would say we're a little different than UVA. They did not have to do the study. They don't take that out.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of freedom.
Yeah, you're your
We
own.
had to do the
Yeah.
study, which is, I know people think we slow rolled it, we have not. We have done everything we are required to do by state and feds to make sure that we are aligned with making sure that we are taking all the accounts in place and then get to the transition plan to the next meeting. Yeah. And with that.
Do you want to give us a good update on collective bargaining, or do you want to not go there?
I would say that,
Yes, please.
I think we have a fair contract with the Amalgamated Transit Union. The city manager, named the city council aware of the three collective units, the actual language of the contracts yet, and that has not happened. It will have to go to soon. I believe that for our first contract, it is extremely fair on all parts. So I used to say, what you hear in the public sphere, in the news, sometimes we overinflated. But I think at this point in time, I think all parties are happy with where we are. It's fair on all parts. And I think it shows all of our employees how valued they are. I would say that.
Okay, and I have a quick question, just because, there is a bill in the General Assembly that would cut out the bureaucracy for the localities to be able to place bus shelters at bus stops. Do you know where that, legislation, because that is critically important, that is now more.
I'm gonna turn to you in.
Yeah, last I heard it passed in the House, was that going to the Senate?
Okay.
Yeah, it's in Senate appropriations.
Great, so we're still alive.
And all the bill would do was
Gonna say.
provide what the RPT is already doing for us on a temporary basis, and yet it makes it a more permanent solution.
But, yes, help cut through the bureaucracy of one department. Yes, that's wonderful. I'm glad it's still alive. For Albemarle County, that is critical.
Can I two follow-ups that on both of yours on the collective bargaining, and my understanding, because I only read it was in the media, the council, maybe the elected officials have to answer this. now have to honor that contract in the budget, or if they can find money?
Well, we haven't voted yet.
But if there's a contract, does council basically have to honor the
We're not
contract?
forced.
We're not forced to.
So the budget still has to find, if we find that money.
Correct, but we anticipate still having capped, so.
So there's still room or need for advocating for that to get in the budget. By citizens, I have people asking about that.
I
It's like,
think that's a
dude, would
perfectly
it-
fine thing to do, yes.
Okay, and thank you for that. And on the House bill that Diantha brought up, is CAT, or the city, or the county, or TJPDC, anybody following that to make sure it gets through? Or are we just?
Well, I certainly sent emails advocating for it, and anybody that would like to. Yeah, we're all keeping an eye on it, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm
We don't.
working on it, but I haven't seen it in days, general subject,
Yes.
so I can ask him also.
And it is supported by PRPT, I believe, so I'm hopeful that we will get that bill.
I mean, there's multiple jurisdictions across the Commonwealth that are active.
Yeah, both rural and,
Thank you.
yeah, but you're certainly welcome to send an email
I
to
am.
your representative if you like, that's what I've done.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, Colin, you're good, okay? Moving on to Mike, John.
Well, I mean, Garland's news is news for everybody who's in transit, so, you know, that's something that we're watching carefully, and responding to driver comments on, and maybe even responding to public comments that are not entirely in keeping with real-life events, but we'll cover that with the council soon, I'm sure. I'm hoping that by next time we're here together, that the Rural Transit Needs Assessment group will have met again, and we'll be able to give a bit of an update on that. We continue to work on micro transit pilot, and hopefully Garland can join one of our meetings, because the consultant wants to talk about zones that would be logical to kind of augment where our services are today. A little bit of a discussion in that meeting today about whether some of our best opportunities are to do curb to curb to get people to our commuter services. I'm torn about that, so we'll talk more, and I'll have an update next month, of course. On the electrification, John's involved in 2 different studies or grant opportunities. So the BEV implementation grant with AECOM is now being coordinated with the award that Virginia Dominion Power got, which is great. Actually got them all on the same call together. And I will say, both of them are looking at ways to site the charging infrastructure, not just at depots, but out into the communities and in rural locations. It does tickle me that the woman from Virginia Power refers to it as, well, we want them to be out in the wild. I love it so much, I just have to tell everybody about it. So,
Well, Albemarle certainly has a lot of wild.
yes. I think the other really interesting thing, we had a visit from 3 reps from Dominion, and we spent most of the meeting not talking about the federal grant Project Safe, but about all the programs Virginia Power already offers that we might be leveraging in the make-ready infrastructure, right? Everything from their wires until you get to the plug. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity potentially for John and other folks there. It does come with a assessment and, perhaps, a 10-year contract afterward, but the terms seem fair since you're saving 50% on the infrastructure along the way. So it has some potential. I think that there's an opportunity. And then I think lastly, this needs some very quick assessment, but I was contacted by Virginia Tech Transportation Institute or Transit Institute. They are trying to respond to a NOFO, $15 million, 6-year plan, looking at the concept of rural transit with automated vehicles, and they'd like to know by tomorrow if, we sign a letter of support. And I said, didn't you call me yesterday? We'll see about that, but it is interesting that is in the works. The first 2 years are really a study period, I think it's a slow enough rollout that maybe it seems more reasonable. On some of the electrification, it seems like the various processes are disjointed as far as when you can get the capital, when you can be charged, and when you can get the actual equipment in. This may have a timeline that's more thoughtful and makes it a possibility to consider. More to come on that if we decide to support that.
Well, Jim definitely has some interesting things going on. Okay, is that it? Any questions from us? Yeah? No? All right. Katie, DRPT, I think it's your turn.
I don't think there's any real updates on terms of, ongoing projects right now. The big thing is reviewing the applications that were received at the beginning of February and working on the SIP creation process over the next few months to really recommend that recommended funding scenario for transit and rail projects across the state.
Okay. Anything you can share from the General Assembly? Because I know you all are always into it in Richmond.
I don't have any real updates right now. And that if it might be helpful for the next one, having our legislative person come in and have some better updates.
Yeah, that actually might be, you probably like that, don't y'all think? You good? Let's just see if we can pencil that in. That'd be great, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Okay, anything else? Anybody, any questions? Okay. All right, we are on to other business. I have one item that I want to mention for you, and then I'll open up, see if anybody else has anything. There is, I believe, a conflict with the May meeting, Christine, and the reason is because there is a transit conference. Is that correct? That still is correct. So I'm just letting folks know that my assumption is it will be canceling the May meeting so that folks can go to the transit conference. That, in my head, I'm just saying, that when we talked about our 90 days, this is going to probably give a little bit more time for that 90 days just because. Having said that, there's lots of things that we can be doing and we're excited about the work. And, but so you can. Christine will have to. And you want to tell us who's the sponsor of the conference?
PTA.
Oh, Ford I used to be on. There you go. Okay, good. That's probably a good conference. So I guess it's okay that we can just on our calendars cancel out. I'll get Lucinda to send a cancellation form to May meeting if that works. Or should we hold it in place in case there's an emergency? I'm always just asking. I'm going to leave that decision up to you.
Let's keep it on the agenda and I'll pull it off 30 days in advance. So
Okay,
make sure
that
everybody
works,
knows
because
well
we're
in
far
advance
out.
I'll cancel.
Exactly, okay. But you can in your brain think you may have a free evening. And I don't have any other business. Is anybody have anything they want to say? Yes.
It's not business and it's not a voting thing, it's just something cool that I saw. Which is, I was down in Lynchburg last week and having to be near a bus stop and they have the little solar panel, like tablets basically that say when things are coming. And it was slick and small and it's by a company called Connect Point. I looked them up. Seems like that's their thing, is solar powered signage for transit. And I figured this would be the group of people who might be interested in that sort of thing.
So I see one person taking notes.
Those two.
And I took some pictures of it, if anyone wants to see, come find me after.
Yeah, well, why don't you share them out, send them to Lucinda and she can share them with us.
Okay,
That'd be
yeah,
good.
great.
Yeah. All right, any other comments, questions? All right, well, hearing no objections, it's 5:06. I'm going to adjourn us until our March meeting. And that will be March 28th, same time, same place. We're good? Thank you, guys.
Okay, Peter, I'll see you this
Yes.
morning. Awesome.